Okay, design and placemaking. This is where you guys are probably most comfortable. But like I said, this has really been going on throughout this project. It's not just stage 6. And bear in mind, these next 2 stages, which is going to be, design and placemaking and then civil engineering, these are taking place really towards the end of your development line, or excuse me, towards the end of your due diligence period. You've already gone through entitlement. You've got your legal stuff hashed out. Once you really start spending monies with your designers and your engineers, you are getting very close to buying the property if you have not already bought it. And so typically you get very impatient developers, which is a good thing for you guys to remember as you start in your design careers. Developers are under a lot of pressure at this point in the deal. So just, be cognizant of that. So we've got the loan secured and we're about to be in it to win it. Previously in the due diligence period, we'd commissioned zoning layouts. We've probably commissioned a site plan, maybe a couple of really good looking home renderings from our architect. And, we're probably using, we may be using one design firm that's got planners and architects and landscape architects, but we might also be going to independent practitioners and using, independent agencies. But either way, we've already entered into agreements with these folks and they're on the team, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to complete the design. So things that we haven't really talked about at this point is form-based coding. So you guys, I know, are working on a form-based code and trying to suss out kind of how that operates, what that looks like. Form-based coding is basically, it's just an alternative to single-use zoning. And the reason that we use them is it basically allows us to get a predictable, unified public realm. And the public realm is basically, the spaces in between buildings, right? It's everywhere where people interact in public. So a predictable, unified public realm by defining the form of the neighborhood blocks, street details, massings, setbacks of buildings, etc., design form. And it's usually it's geared based on a transect zone. And, T1 to T6 is what you normally see. And that's basically talking about the intensity of development. T1 would be like a natural world, maybe a national park like Yellowstone or Yosemite. T6 is as urban as it gets. Think of Times Square, downtown Manhattan. And so, there's different character that's appropriate for all of, those 2 realms and all the ones in between them, like the suburbs, right? So form-based coding sometimes is implemented by an entire city, though that is still rare, unfortunately, in my opinion, at this point in time. And so you get developers like Dr. Mulder who implement form-based codes within their communities so that at least their communities that they have control of look fantastic and have a similar character. So, that's one of the most important things that you can do as a designer is think through that, because what that does is that sets the DNA that subsequent builders and designers have to operate off of. They can't go and build, an igloo in South Texas or something crazy like that, or a teepee in the middle of your project, because you have set, all those different forms that they need to look at. And you need to also ensure that there is still room for some innovation within confines. So we talked about the zoning layouts a little bit. That's just, basically laying out where each use is going to go and where you're going to mix uses. Talking about landscape architecture, your site plan needs to, for Crossways especially, you guys have probably laid out a site plan that, it honors the natural features that exist of the site. It's the reason that you fell in love with the site in the first place, right? So instead of dominating the natural world and cutting the tops off of a mountain and tearing down all the trees, what you've done is you have fit your buildings and your streets and things like that in those spaces that are appropriate for buildings. And so by doing that, you've ensured sustainability while also saving money, creating value. And in particular, what you've done here is that you've created enduring value. And enduring value means that your project is only going to get more valuable over time. That's extremely important to take that to heart, because a lot of projects, especially in the modern age, look worse and worse and worse every decade. If you guys go and drive old residential communities that were built in the 80s, chances are that the siding is getting rotten and people are stopping to take care of their yards and things of that nature. If you create a place that honors nature and that's already, it's beautiful from the get-go, that natural site is going to give you enough value up front that it's going to be a sought after location and people are going to take care of it, and property values are going to reflect that. Just recognize that landscape architecture is really the primary intersection between the natural and the built worlds. And so that's really the spaces between buildings that are making up that public realm. And then moving down to architecture. So, a couple things that you want to think about. You want to study the living traditions of the locals. And that's a term in your book list. I recommended a couple of books by Steve Mouzon, who's a architect that works in the South, a new urbanist guy. Living traditions are basically just, construction details that have a purpose. They basically say, hey, we do this because. In the South, one of the things I talked about, for those of you that saw me in the Aggie Leadership Conference, is, in the South, we paint, especially around Georgia, we paint the ceilings of our porches like a powder blue, a light blue. And there's a tradition behind that comes from basically the African-American population over there, the Gullahs. But the practical application of that is that it discourages spiders from basically spinning webs and all kinds of things in your porch ceilings. And so you need to study the local traditions, and by doing that, you're going to establish character, and it's going to feel authentic, and it's also going to add value to your buildings, right? The other thing is I've got the original green and light imprint here, low-tech sustainability techniques. Those original green is a book by Steve Mouzon. Light imprint is a book that's on your list that's written by Tom Lowe. Basically, this is thinking about the way that people built houses before we had, extremely efficient Energy Star AC systems and low emissivity windows and things like that. You use passive solar orientation, you use natural ventilation, cross and chimney flow, things like that. And by doing that, you reduce the utility bills and the utility loads on those buildings. And that makes your buildings more affordable for your consumer at the end of the day, and a hell of a lot more enjoyable. So think about those things. They truly are important. So at the end of this process, your costs have increased. Designers love, as you guys know, love to increase costs on a project. Luckily, you're a forward-looking developer. You've got a little design background yourself, and so you can appreciate that. But you always have to make a point to compromise, and you're going to have to make hard decisions here. You can't do everything you want to do. So the point is, you need to go back to whatever your personal vision statement is for the project anytime you have to make a compromise, and you need to make sure that you do not compromise your vision. All good design protects sales income. And it's important that you make your bank and your equity partner understand that. Next slide, please. Okay. Civil engineering, you can see we got our first 3 goals up there. Again, amazingly, we're at the end of our due diligence stage, but the clock really is ticking. With the site plan in place, we can now hire a civil engineer to create civil construction plans. You push your naturally pragmatic, skeptical engineer to retain all those little quirks of your design that he or she probably doesn't like because they're very much left-brain thinkers generally, right? So they're going to make you compromise a little bit to ensure that the grading, the drainage, the utilities, the roads, all those things are in accordance with the municipality's unified development code. So they're going to make sure that it's actually safe to live in this place, that it'll actually drain, all those good things. And so your engineer makes adjustments and obtains a stamped approved set of civil plans from the municipality's subject matter experts. So in the city, City of Bryan, that'd be your fire marshal, that'd be traffic, that'd be the engineering and public works department, etc. Once all those different departments have examined their piece of the pie, they'll approve those plans and in the plat as well, which we'll talk about. And they're going to approve the release of a general site work permit, which lets your contractors start turning dirt. Alongside those plans, I just mentioned that there's a subdivision plat that goes through the same process. that plat ultimately, once it is recorded with the county clerk, that is going to legally allow you to divide the land and sell it to different people. So maybe sell homes or whatever from one big ranch. And so that's what that does. The plat basically is just a subdivision plan for the community. So once you've completed your plans and you've got your plat, the engineer is going to issue you what we call OPCs, those opinions of probable cost. And that's basically where the engineer is looking at their historical costs they've seen in projects. And because, projects always get material and projects always get more expensive with time, OPCs always come in way too low. So as a developer, you just take them, you laugh a little bit, you make fun of them with your team, and then you go and find your contractors and you ask them to give you soft bids, which are not binding, but they're a better idea of what the cost will be. And finally, the engineer helps you coordinate the bidding process. And the bidding process is basically just where general site work contractors, the guys that have dozers and scrapers and all kinds of other equipment, are going to submit bids based on their specific efficiencies and their profit needs. And so they're all kind of playing a little game against each other. Some of them are good with rock. Some of them are good with more pliable plastic dirts or soils. Some of them are really great building retaining walls. Whatever it is, you're going to naturally find contractors that are just better suited to your site, and hopefully their bid is going to reflect that. You're going to get a better cost from that. So once you've gathered those bids, we can go on to the next stage in the next slide. Okay, horizontal site development, which is really where I'm going to be making my money over there in South Africa. This is where you're actually building the site, right? I differentiate between horizontal and vertical for obvious reasons. I think a lot of people don't think about the horizontal side of the coin, and it's really something that's not taught in most colleges and things like that. So we're very lucky to have the MLPD program at Texas A&M because it's a huge part of the development process in general. So setting the stage again for stage 8, in the perfect world, your due diligence period just ended as you obtain that approved plat and that general site work permit, right? So, the due diligence period expires, and within, say, 3 to 5 days, you are obligated to take out that loan and purchase the land from the Putter Guilds. In reality, you guys, I've been talking for, 30 minutes now, actually longer than that. So you guys know how much we've done up to this point. The chances of you getting all that done during your due diligence period is very slim. Hopefully you've given yourself extensions and everything else you can to help that out. So in reality, you're probably already late. You purchased the land a month or 2 ago, and you've been incurring interest on that development loan. Ouch. So now you're really feeling the pressure, and you need to be as efficient as possible when you're building the site. And so your goal here at the end of the day is to build the public infrastructure, which is the roads, the utility pipe, the drainage, channels and ponds, city parks, etc., so that the city will come in and accept ownership and maintenance of that infrastructure, and thus relieving you of responsibility of it. And then once they've done that, they will allow you to record your subdivision plat, and that allows you to legally sell land. Goal 1 and goal 2 together is generally called substantial completion, right? So just as we move through this process, you can see all the various steps which are generally in chronological order here, and it is more of a linear process here. But you've selected the winning bid, you found the general contractor that you like, and so you first set your expectations in a pre-construction meeting, and you basically set up, say, weekly meetings with that general contractor where you're going to check their work and answer any questions they have, help them out where they need it, and call them out if they're doing something wrong, right? Keeping control of the project, but trusting them to do their job because they're very good at it. Over the next, let's just say 12 months for like a typical single phase of a residential development, over the next 12 months, you meet with that contractor every week, like I said, and you start knocking out these steps. That first phase, earthwork is the hardest cost to estimate because it's very difficult to estimate how much cut and how much fill you need in a project. But the idea at the end of the day is to get to a dirt balance where you have balanced that amount of cut and fill so that you don't have to haul in expensive dirt or haul out dirt from the site and find a place to put it. That'll bankrupt you pretty quickly. You also need to ensure that the site drains effectively as you rough grade the lots and the roads. So those are, your two kind of primary concerns there. When you're looking at the sanitary sewer system, the sewer lines often drive the design for the civil engineer because a sewer line is gravity fed. It's not under pressure. And so it has to run from uphill to downhill, and then it has to exit somewhere. In most cities, that means to a wastewater treatment plant. And so a lift station is something that literally pumps shit uphill, if you'll excuse my language. But, lift stations can cost $1 million. They will bankrupt you very quickly as well. So a lot of the design is figuring out how to get that sanitary sewer to drain from high to low. And that sets, because there's a certain depth for that, that sets the elevation of your roads and things of that nature. Looking at the stormwater sewer, this is another gravity-fed system. Usually, traditional conventional development uses a whole heck of a lot of very big reinforced concrete pipe. This is all the drainage infrastructure that you see as you cross drainage ditches and things like that. And, RCP is extremely expensive. And we're talking about RCP that might be, 46 inches or something in diameter. So if you're smart, you want to avoid just, setting curb inlets in the street and piping all your stormwater in, underground and into a pond as much as possible. That light imprint handbook that I talked about has a lot of great strategies for channelization and storage of stormwater. It can be something as simple in a rural area as a swale and berm. It could be a beautiful rain garden that adds value to the homes. So just think about those other techniques and don't be afraid to innovate. When it comes to, potable water is a pressurized system, pressure fed. So you're a little bit more flexible in the design. We won't talk about that too much. With paving, paving in general, when I talk about that, I'm talking about sidewalks, I'm talking about streets, I'm talking about walking paths, whatever it is. What's important for paving is you want to minimize the amount of concrete or asphalt that you put down, because for one thing, it's expensive, and for another thing, it's impermeable. And so, wherever you can, especially where traffic is light, maybe it's only foot traffic, or maybe it's a back alley where cars are only going at 10 or 15 miles per hour. Maybe you use decomposed granite or seashells down by the coast or whatever, and you get away from concrete and asphalt. That's going to save you money, and it's going to add a heck of a lot of charm to your project. Once you get the paving done, you've got the curbs in, and you've got all of the what we call the wet utilities in. The final grade, the final elevation of your dirt right outside the curbs is achieved. And so now your electric company, your gas company, AT&T, Comcast, whatever, all of those dry utility providers come in and lay their lines, just a couple of feet underneath the ground, typically with the electric at the bottom, the gas on top of that, etc. And so once you get the dry UT in, you can fine tune the lot grading. You complete all the landscaping and irrigation that's required. And, after you have the city inspector out and that city inspector agrees that the work is substantially complete, and he's probably beat you up 3 or 4 times and you've had to go and redo things and fix cracks in the road and things like that, you get that city acceptance and you're able to record your plat. And now you can start to sell lots. You can sell the land. And we go on to the next stage, next slide. So stage 9 is vertical construction. So you guys obviously know a lot about this as well. And so, I chose not to bore you guys with first you do the foundation, then you go to framing, and, you guys know all that. So let's talk about, the brass tacks of what a developer cares about. Your goal here is to get to a certificate of occupancy, which is basically where the city is issuing you approval for people to occupy your building, whether it's a homeowner or a renter in an apartment, whatever it is. So you can start sales and leasing in earnest of the buildings, right? So because Crossways Ventures is building a mixed use community, your partnership intends to earn income in a variety of ways. You're going to sell a few developed lots, just the serviced lots with the utilities, and you're going to let people design and build their own custom homes. So that's one very quick avenue to building some income, right? Because you don't have to build the building. You might build a couple of homes yourself to set the stage for what the architecture needs to look like and to show people that there's interest here. You build visual interest on the site. So you build houses and you sell them. And then another way is that you're you're mixed use. So you're building commercial, you're building office, you're building retail, restaurants, whatever. And you probably don't want to be a restaurateur. You're a land developer. You're not a specialist in making manicotti or something like that, right? So you go and find an accomplished Italian food restaurateur and you bring them in. And so, we call all those different aspects, all those different types of real estate, we call those food groups, retail, commercial, residential, hotel, whatever. Those are food groups, right? And so at this stage, we're starting to negotiate and enter into agreements with all these different experts in all these different food groups. At Crossways, some of you guys might have heard that we are examining a deal with a hotel aficionado who also wants to invest in a narrow gauge railroad. There's a railroad that was built in 1906 that it's like if you ever go to Colorado, like to Steamboat, they've got those old steam driven trains out there. There's one that comes to the Crossways boundary. And so we're entering into a joint venture with this person to where we contribute land within Crossways so he can build a hotel, and he will bring customers from Port Elizabeth on that rail line out to Crossways, maybe for the weekend just to stay at the hotel, or maybe it's a commuter rail once it gets to be more robust. But this is where we start to think about deals like that, and it's where the project starts to become a lot of fun, really. So generally, when you're looking at vertical construction, before you start building, you're considering two different kinds of strategies. One is disposition, where you build a building and you immediately sell it and you get that money, kind of like a balloon payment. You get all that money at once. And then a passive income strategy, obviously, you guys probably know this, is where you build a building and then you hold on to it and you reap the passive income, the leasing income every month. You hold on to it. And so the loans, at this point, you have to pay back that acquisition and development loan that you took out with Texas Capital Bank. You've only been paying interest throughout the previous stage of site development. And so now that principal is due and you are still incurring interest. So as you look at all these different strategies, you try and get a lot of money up front, and you do your best to sell lots and sell houses quickly before you get into the very complicated projects. And with the proceeds from those sales, you pay back that first bank. And so now you and your equity partner have 100% control of the project. And so you can start looking at other loans if you want to take them out for specific projects. So if you're going to do a buy and sell, like maybe you want to build a couple of commercial buildings, you want to sell them to restaurateurs, then you can take out another interest-only construction loan, but this time it's a construction loan for vertical development. And you'll repay that after construction as you sell that property, just like you did with the lots. Say you want to build an apartment complex and you're going to hold that apartment complex, then you're going to take out a construction loan, but it's going to have to get refinanced into a permanent loan, which, you move from an interest-only loan and then you repay that loan basically with what's effectively a mortgage. It's just a standard, maybe a 30-year term where you're paying principal and interest every month. So either way, you are financing the vertical construction of buildings. They're going through foundation and framing and shingles and electrical and all that good stuff, plumbing, yada, yada, yada. And eventually you get to a certificate of occupancy and people start to live in your community. And we get to the next stage. We're getting towards the end too, I promise. There's only 11 stages. Okay, so marketing and sales, leasing, stage 10. So the end state here is getting those executed sales and leasing agreements. And, really, your marketing and your sales effort began way back probably during stage 8 when you were doing site development in earnest. And, when you were talking about marketing in the 21st century, we may run some newspaper ads. We may take out a single page in an estate living magazine or like Texas Monthly or something like that. But honestly, people don't read those as much as they used to. The numbers just aren't there. And the other thing is that in the internet age, we now have highly targeted digital marketing. And so, we're taking techniques like geofencing, where basically if you've got a cell phone in your pocket and you walk into our sales center or the perimeter of Crossways or anywhere near it, you're going to start seeing ads pop up as you browse the internet for Crossways Farm Village. It's a little bit shady, it seems like to me. I'm like a libertarian kind of like privacy guy, but it does work. It's very effective. Pay-per-click, search engine optimization, where Crossways pops up as number 1, number 2, whatever. We're using all of these extremely targeted techniques to not just we're not casting a wide net anymore. We may do that to a degree, but what we're doing is we're saying, okay, who's my buyer? We did that way back in due diligence. Who's my buyer? It's somebody that is interested in maybe mountain biking and farm-to-table dining and agriculture in general, or at least the appearance that they live this bucolic, like, Guns and Garden magazine kind of lifestyle. And so you are now targeting those people directly. And so what you get is a much higher conversion rate, where the number of people that see your ad ultimately become buyers, right? Because you've targeted the right people as opposed to just newspapering, your deal all over the city. So, the golden rule with marketing is to know thy target market segment as you know thyself, right? Like, you need to understand the psychology of your buyer, and you need to exploit that psychology. When it comes to sales, there used to be a saying in the industry that really, for obvious reasons, is not said anymore, but I'm going to say it anyways. Success is a fat sales budget and a skinny sales rep. It's kind of mean. But nowadays we know better. The best sales rep is really, it's not necessarily, the pretty blonde girl or whatever, like it used to be in the Mad Men days. The best sales rep is somebody that is who really is bought into the community. Maybe somebody that lives in the community or would live in the community. Your goal is to find the most enthusiastic, emotionally intelligent sales rep that you can. And then you pay them an okay salary, something they're not mad about, but they're not like blown away by it, with a great commission. Because if they get a piece of every home that they sell, they're going to be hungry every day they come to the office, and they're going to be that much more enthusiastic. So a robust sales budget and an enthusiastic sales rep is like your secret weapon. And, good designers and good developers listen to those sales reps, because they are talking to customers every single day, and they're gathering on the ground human intelligence on what are people's dislikes, what are their needs, what are their desires, things of that nature. And we're adjusting the design and we're adjusting the sales strategy in accordance with that information. So anyways, we start gathering executed sales and leasing agreements. We already had the certificates of occupancy, and people began living in our project. So beautifully, we eventually are able to pay our loans off, and our partners are able to start splitting the returns. And so we start gaining our equity back, a return of equity. And then, who knows, maybe at this point we start gaining a return on equity. So this is where you start popping champagne bottles, right? And we move on to the next stage. So with property management, if you thought that this was going to be an easy 10-step process, you were wrong. You popped the champagne bottles a little bit too early. And I put that in there for a reason, because a lot of developers do that, right? A lot of developers have this idea that, once something's built and sold, they can wash their hands of it. And it's just not the case. And, a lot of times that's like the fatal flaw for a project. So you need to think about how that community is going to live into the future. We talked about enduring value in design. You as a developer owe it to yourself, owe it to your customers, and owe it to your reputation and legacy to protect that enduring value. And so usually the way that we do that, in addition to just having good design up front, is that we have homeowners associations, condominium associations, and property owners associations that regulate how our customers, the people that live and work there in Crossways, are going to operate within the community. So you guys probably know what CCNRs are, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Those are the rules that dictate, how you can use your property, and also what you can build and what you can't build, and what color your house can be, what it can't be, and all those different things, right? So HOAs and CCNRs in general have a very, very bad reputation in the world, and for good reason. And I tend to agree with them. Most developers make those restrictions. They pawn the job off to the youngest land person in the office, which was usually me for the last 3 years. And, they make them write the rules, and that person doesn't know a damn thing about what's important and what's not important. And so the community is left with a set of guidelines that are probably more onerous than they need to be. Maybe they regulate how high the grass can be and when you need to mow, things like that. They're too invasive. And what really needs to be focused on here is stuff that's inherent in that form-based code. And that form-based code should really guide a lot of these decisions. You want to give people the ability to innovate and to express their humanness, express their personalities, while keeping them within reasonable confines, so you don't get, Billy Bob with a car up on blocks in the front yard, or, John and Jane operating a makeshift tattoo parlor in their house right next to the elementary school, right? And so you, as Crossways Ventures, the partnership that you developed, you're acting as what we call the declarant. You declared these restrictions, and now your job is to enforce them. And you enforce them throughout construction. You enforce them throughout sales. You retain control. So the HOA board, the customers, are not typically voting until much later in this process. But ultimately, when you finally get towards the end of sales and you feel that you are comfortable losing control of a given phase of development, you elect an HOA board or a property owner's board, and they take control of the process, and now they own the community. So they have control over things, and they can bring lawsuits against you if you try and weigh back in. So you always do that carefully. But once you have finally turned over the community to these associations, you can finally wash your hands of that phase, and you can go get some good sleep at night. You're probably, 2 to 5 years into the process at this point. So it's pretty awesome. Wrapping up the final stage here, you need to think about your risk-adjusted return. We've been talking for a long time. And you and your partner at this point have hopefully earned a very impressive financial return, because you can see how crazy this process is. You can see how much risk is involved. And so, we're looking for a 15% or better annual return on our equity, which is way more than you would earn even with a very successful stock market portfolio or something like that. So the possibility of reward is extremely high in development, but the risk to get that and the risk that you may lose it is also extremely high. And so that concept is called a risk-adjusted return. And that's something that you're always weighing throughout the process. So you guys have been listening to me talk for like an hour and a half now. We've gone through hell and back together trying to get Crossways built. I'll turn it over. Mark, if you'll advance to the next slide, please. You guys have my contact information. I'm going to stick around. And if we still have time, I'll stick around to talk about your individual projects, or y'all can call me later on. But I just want to leave you with this idea that, I'm an Aggie. There's a lot of Aggie developers out there. There's guys like your professor, Mark Clayton, and Jeffrey Booth in the MLPD program. We're all obviously very approachable people. I'm a normal dude. You can see exhibit A through D there on the slide. I really enjoy what I do. That's why this thing has run so long today. So you guys feel free to use that cell phone number. And I really do mean that. I want to hear from you guys, and I want to see you guys come out to South Africa sometime if we can make that happen. So appreciate you guys listening to me run my gums here.